Thank you for joining us for Don't Gloss Over the Glossary, presented by Paul Krieger. Paul Krieger is an award winning teacher and the creator, author, and illustrator of the Visual Analogy Guide series. Due to the success of his first book on human anatomy in 2004, this unique book concept quickly evolved into a four-book series. He's a professor emeritus of anatomy and physiology at Grand Rapids Community College and also works as a scientific illustrator. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for that nice introduction. And I really want to thank you for the great leadership you've shown in TAA as president the past 2 years. I know I've learned a lot and we'll have some big shoes to fill come July 1st. So thanks very much. If people look at the bottom, I have my contact information on this first slide. So if you want to contact me later or have any questions to discuss anything I bring up today, my email is the Gmail address given there. It's Paul Krieger Studio, all one word, @gmail.com. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This is the book cover from the first book that I made. It's 19 years ago already, A Visual Analogy Guide to Human Anatomy. So just to give you a real brief background, because it does relate to the glossary, this was a book that actually was born, like many of our good book ideas, in the classroom. And my students actually encouraged me to create my first book. And the idea was, I'm an illustrator and I love doing illustration and art. And I often would go around table to table in the lab and I would compare things to everyday life, anatomical structures and things such as that. And students found this really useful and helpful to help them visualize the unknown anatomical structures. And I actually used that as a basis and a theme for creating my book. And my books, I really wanted to be standalone supplements when I created them. And so I kind of refer to them as core concepts books. They go over a lot of the core concepts in anatomy and physiology, and also one on chemistry that I have, and also have a lot of activities. So I kind of stockpiled it with all my teaching tips and my mnemonics, and it has a lot of other learning activities involved in it as well. So this is my, it was originally in my imprint book, and that was followed by a visual analogy guide to human physiology, which was then followed by my combined book, which is my big book, the Human Anatomy and Physiology book, which is shown there in its 4th edition. And then the last one, the 4th one in the series, is a visual analogy guide to chemistry. And I just want to focus on these first 3 really today, because all of those started out as imprint books, and they all have traditional glossaries in the back of the book and the printed book. And that's really kind of the basis for what we'll be talking about today and referencing, giving tips about the glossary. So I'm in a process of transitioning right now. My publisher, way back in 2004, with my first book that was created, was actually Morton Publishing, and they're based in Denver, Colorado. And they were a wonderful publisher to work for. It was a true family business, and I thoroughly enjoyed working for them for all the 19 years. But then what happened was 2 years ago, they were acquired by Top Hat, and Top Hat was in the process of actually acquiring a lot of small publishers. And so Morton was one of those. So now I've become an author for Top Hat, and everything's changed. I've had to totally rethink my book. I'm now in a total digital and interactive environment. And it's been a really thrilling process, actually, to reinvent my book in a new way. So if you look over here, you can see now we don't have a glossary at the back of a book. We have, universal design principles. So you see this red arrow pointing to an underlying term, which is in blue text, which is semilunar valves. And then the box will now pop up. So when students hover their cursor over that term, a box will pop up and boom, the definition will come up right there, definition, pronunciation. And in some cases, audio files are built in. So we have the pronunciation done with an audio file as well. So this is just one of the many advances and nice new things that I was able to integrate into my books. And my experience so far has been really, really wonderful. And I've had a chance to integrate things like videos and 3D rotatable anatomical models and many other items into my books. But that's a whole nother topic for another day. And that's not what we're here to talk about today. I just want to let you know that I'm in the process of big change, and it started in January, and this anatomy and physiology book will be completed at the end of the summer in August. So that's kind of where I'm at. So that gives you a little feeling for my book series. So as you look at this, we want to go through and we want to talk about simple outline. So the first thing is the challenges I had of dealing with a glossary. So I'll just briefly mention a few of those. Second thing is, what is my idea for the master glossary that came up? And this wasn't really my original idea, but was my editor's original idea. And I'll mention that as well. And then from that master glossary concept came up 8 general guidelines for working on the master glossary. And I'm just going to share those with you today. And that will be followed by a Q&A at the end. So one thing I wanted to mention is, it is not my intention to say that my way of doing the glossary is the one and only right way to do it. These were just guidelines that I decided on that fit my book series really well. And of course, a lot of these things are personal preferences, more like what you'd have in a style sheet. So that's really a good thing to start with, to keep in mind. So I reached out to one of my colleagues when I was dealing with another textbook author friend, when I was dealing with a problem with my glossary. And she said, "Oh, the glossary. So you've fallen into the abyss." Ha, 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 ha. And actually, I kind of chuckled at that when she first said it, but working on a glossary, as many of you well know, if you've had that experience, really can be like falling into the abyss, because you start to realize, wow, there's so many different things to consider and so many factors, and how am I going to make all these decisions, and how I'm going to keep the whole thing consistent. And it can actually get really overwhelming if you just kind of dive in without really any set guidelines. So what I actually did was I actually did a work for hire for my first original glossary. And I'll tell you why I did that and my experience with that from the beginning. But this is my first and only polling question today that I'll ask Kevin to help me with. And the polling question is, did either you or your publisher hire someone to create the glossary for your book? So if you're a multiple book author, let's say for your first book, and let's see how many yeses and nos that we get for this one. So we'll give that a little time to go. Still have about 15 seconds. I don't know if these have preset times for them or not, but it's just showing me the time running, I think, at the time left. So most people not, most people did it themselves. Only one person said yes so far. Okay. So we have 100% answered. So I think we can probably end the poll. So only 1 out of 13 people attending actually did a work for hire. That's interesting to know. Okay, so all of the issues that I'm talking about, you'll have dealt with firsthand, and knowing all the overwhelming things you have to deal with. So let's see. Could you please hit the stop sharing button on that one, Kevin? Are you able to do that?
Yeah, it should have stopped already. Did it?
Oh, okay. I still have it showing on my screen, but that's okay. So so for this, let me tell you the reason that I did it as a work for hire. This was actually from a conference that I attended for TAA conference many, many years ago. And I was just first starting out as an author. And for my books, I was actually both the author and the illustrator. And just doing the authoring and illustrating was quite overwhelming to begin with. So one of the pieces of advice I got from a veteran author who was giving a presentation on writing your first book and getting organized was, you got to prioritize what's the most important to you and maybe consider work for hires for some of the other things. And so this was low on my priority list, considering all the work I had to do. It took me about 2.5 years to finish my first book. So that was the reason I decided to do what I did. I gave some general guidelines to a person for a work for hire, and then I ended up editing the final version, and that's kind of how I did that. So let's see. So think of all the things you have to do and you have to contemplate when you're dealing with all the things that need to be considered with your glossary. So, okay, I was able to close that screen. I needed to close a screen that I was seeing, and now I was able to do that. So I'm going to get my laser pointer back out. There we go. So the first probably big overarching question is, what qualifies as a term to be included in the first place in your glossary? You could take the simple approach and say, well, maybe I'm just going to go with all the boldface terms in the book and do it that way. But then maybe some of those boldface terms need further elaboration and that would make you be forced to actually add additional terms to the book. So this is really a matter of personal preference. There's not really a right or wrong answer to it, but that's kind of the first big question that you face. Then, are you going to go for a detailed definition or more of a concise one? Probably part of the decision for this will go into who's the audience for your book. But again, this is really more a matter of what your personal goal is for your glossary. It's not a right or wrong answer. Are you going to choose to use examples with your definitions or no? If you do use examples, which terms will get them and which ones won't? Again, lots of things to think about. As we know, there's more than one pronunciation system to use. Sometimes these are trendy, some goes and become more in vogue than others. Which pronunciation system are you going to use, and why are you using that one? And do you have a recommendation from your publisher, your editor, on which one to use? Are you going to include all complementary pairs of terms? So for example, in anatomy and physiology, we have the term positive feedback, which has a sister companion term of negative feedback. If you put positive feedback in there, does it demand that you also put the sister term negative feedback? Many would say, yeah, you probably want to have both, but again, it's not mandatory. So I could go on and on with a bulleted list, and you guys could all add many, many more as to, what criterion you're going to use and what things you need to consider. So this is just giving more evidence that it's a complex issue to deal with, as we all know. So when feeling overwhelmed by all these factors to consider, my engineering friends would say, you're feeling overwhelmed because you don't have a system. Create a system of clearly defined rules and procedures, and your problem will be solved. So I took heed the advice of my engineering friends, and this is my editor, and her name is Marta Pentecost, and she is the person who actually suggested the idea for a master glossary. So let me explain the problem. The problem is my 3 books in anatomy and physiology were being edited and revised independently, so they ended up not having a consistent glossary. So for example, let's say I was working on my anatomy book, and as I was doing a new edition for that one, maybe I edited a definition or changed it or added an example. That didn't always carry over. Maybe I forgot about that when I did the next edition of my physiology book, or maybe it wasn't tracked properly, or maybe I didn't addition of a new term or deletion that didn't carry over to the physiology book or to the A&P book. Well, you can see the problem. The problem was we didn't have one central repository for all the terms and definitions that go in the glossary and pronunciations. So Marta suggested, hey, why don't we do this, Paul? Why don't we create one master glossary, and then we'll just list the terms we want from your anatomy book, your physiology book, your A&P book, and we'll just draw from the master glossary that will allow it to always be consistent, and that will solve the problem. And I applauded Marta. It was a great idea, and it worked out really well. And I only did that actually very recently. But I still found I had problems. So even with the master glossary, I found, I'm seeing other inconsistencies, whether it's the way I did the pronunciation in this one, or whether it's how I dealt with an irregular plural form, or this or that, or so many other little things. So what I found is that, yep, the master glossary was a solution for this, but the other problems required even more work. So the other work was I needed to get some guidelines that my editors could use while they were working on the master glossary when they first originally created it. So what I did was I said, okay, we all need to get on the same page, because they were asking me questions about how to edit the glossary, and that was forcing me to re-examine a lot of things. And you know how it goes. It opens a can of worms, and you're dealing with so many different issues at once that I found it necessary to create, okay, working with my editors, I said, here's 8 general guidelines that I'm going to use. And then I received their feedback on it after doing it. We all kind of agreed to that, and then we move forward. And so I'm just going to share with you what those 8 general guidelines were, and then we can feel free to comment on it afterwards. So here's the first one. The first one was glossary terms should be in singular form rather than plural form. So I'm dealing with things with blood vessels. I'm going to say artery, not arteries. So I always have a rationale for this, and this was my reasoning. So my books are standalone supplements, and they're often used in conjunction with different textbooks. So what I usually do in my research is I look at what are most of the textbooks doing in this case. Do most of them use singular, or most of them use plural? I also reference medical dictionaries like Stedman's and Tabor's and things like that, and I look at what they're doing. Amazingly enough, in my research, I even found that the medical dictionaries, you'd think that they would be the gold standard. They weren't even consistent in all the things I was looking at. So that really surprised me. Anyway, unless there was a good reason not to do it, my general default rule was to say, okay, if that's what most of the textbooks are doing, then basically I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. So the next rule is, so anytime I have, I can't actually read my slide for this one. Can you read my slide for me, Kevin? I have a,
Yeah, sorry, I was muted there. Okay. Yeah, so it says point number 2, for glossary terms that consist of 2 words, the pronunciation should be placed after both words rather than between them.
right. Thank you. I had a little cover up on my screen. So, so for example, in the term medulla oblongata, in this case, I have kept the word intact, the full term intact. It's 2 words, and then I put the pronunciation afterwards. So what was my reasoning for this? This is a matter of preference, but I feel that the student will be less confused when you have a 2-word terms kept intact and you don't insert the definition between them. So there was another point that I did. Okay. And then I'm going to ask you to do the same thing again, Kevin. Can you read that first
Okay,
one?
yeah. So point 3 is for 2-word terms that contain common words like body, node, plane, cavity, loop, cells, do not include pronunciation for these common words.
Thank you. So here's a term, nephron loop, and that's from the kidneys, a microscopic structure in the kidneys. So there's a lot of terms in anatomy physiology that they have 2-word terms that use these common words such as node and plane and loop and cell. So nephron's the main term. So we just define the term nephron alone after it. The reason for this was that it's less cumbersome, simpler, and clearer. So that's the rationale there. And by the way, I do have a handout on this one, so you can always refer to the handout later as well. So now we come to number 4. Sorry to impose on you, Kevin. Can you read
Okay,
it?
well, I'll just keep doing it until you tell me to stop.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so point 4 is for terms that have an irregular plural form, list both the singular and the plural forms, along with the pronunciations for both forms in the following format.
Right. So here we go. This term is villus, the singular, plural, PL, villi. And then I use villus, semicolon, villi pronunciation. So we have them together. So the rationale for this was, or the reasoning for it, it's really just a matter of preference. But I liked it better after looking at all the different options for this, I liked it better because it was clean and simple. Okay, here's number 5.
Okay, when an example is used in the definition, place the example at the end of the definition after a semicolon, then use e.g. in italics instead of for example, or this includes.
So I might have the term polysaccharide, and then I give the definition, ... and then there's a semicolon, e.g. is my for example, and then cellulose. Now I could go on a whole nother rationale for how do you choose which terms get examples and which ones don't. But I like this, the reasoning for it because of its brevity, consistency, and better organization. I found that I wasn't consistently doing this. In some cases, I had the word for example. In some cases, I had e.g. So I wanted to clean it up and be consistent throughout the whole glossary. So I decided to do that. Number 6.
When a more preferred term is offered as a quote, see other, the format should be that the alternate term is italicized, but not the word see.
This is really, so fallopian tube, that's really specific epithet. We're trying to get away from those in anatomy. So the default term or better term is uterine tube. And so I have C, uterine tube. And the reasoning for that is really, it's just a matter of preference. I found in my glossary that I wasn't using italics consistently. Sometimes I'd have C, uterine tube, all 3 words in italics. And so I just wanted to have the default term in italics. So that's really a minor issue. Now we come to number 7.
When the part of speech for a term is given, the format should be that it is abbreviated and placed in parentheses and in a regular font.
Right. So we have mucus, adjective, or mucus, noun. So same pronunciation, different spelling. And in anatomy physiology, we talk about mucous membrane secreting mucus. So the reasoning for this is it's just a matter of preference, but I thought it's important to point out because of this, this issue. Last one, number 8.
When a clarification about a term is given, the format should be that it follows the term in parentheses and the words should be italicized.
Thank you, Kevin. So we have the term crest, and this really, if I'm specifically referencing the skeletal system where it comes up, we would say as in bone marking. So the reasoning for here is really just a matter of preference and also for clarity to make sure, it's clear to the students what crest you're referring to and in what context. So that's all I really wanted to share, just those guidelines, and those proved to be very helpful for me in creating the master glossary, which really just resulted in a much clearer, more consistent, and hopefully more useful tool for the students too. So thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, I'll be happy to take those.
Okay, so we do have a couple of comments in there. Robert talks about having a style guide in general. and including, material on the glossary. And then he also recommends the practice of keeping the glossary file open as he revises the chapter so that he can revise the glossary, on the fly.
Yeah.
And that way he's consistent with how he, describes things in the glossary
Right.
and the chapter itself.
That's
And then,
great.
yeah. And then Marielle talks about her experience of moving from print to digital, and she had pop-up glossary entries, within the text, and ran into the issue of some glossary terms have two different definitions. The example she gives is cone, which can be a type of receptor in the eye, and or it could be something completely different, like the reproductive structure of certain trees. So
Right.
she ended up separating them all and said that even in the print book that works better, having done that. So
That's great.
um and then let's see, yeah, so and Sean, thanks you for having such a methodical approach. Do we have any other questions? Anybody want to post a question or raise your hand? Okay, well, thanks a lot, Paul. This was a great overview of solving a problem that and how to survive the abyss in the glossary. And